26 January 2021. This is from Fort Observer from 22 January 2021. Political warning. Democrats push domestic terror bill. Democrats this week introduced the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2021. Co-sponsored by Jerry Nadler, the bill would authorize offices in the Justice Department, the FBI, and the DHS. Would authorize offices in the Justice Department, FBI, and DHS, and task them with monitoring, investigating, and prosecuting domestic terrorism cases. In other words, they're going to be going after Americans. Anybody who voted for Trump, you're a target. If you don't realize that, now you're an idiot. The bill would also establish task them with monitoring, investigating, and prosecuting domestic terrorism cases with a particular focus on white racial extremism. Yeah. The bill would also establish a domestic terrorism executive committee, which would act as an information clearinghouse on white racial extremist terror threats and share that information with local and state law enforcement agencies. Finally, the DHS, DOJ, FBI, and Defense Department would coordinate jointly to detect and weed out white racial extremist infiltration of the military and law enforcement. Remember when they vetted all those National Guardsmen? They had to do a loyalty screening for the National Guardsmen to be in DC. If people didn't get that as a clue, you're fucking ignorant. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2021 follows similar bills proposed in 2017 and 2020, observers note. The 2020 version of this bill was passed by the House but died in the Senate. It's not going to die anymore. This 2021 version faces an uphill challenge, which is likely why the language in support of the bill inflates the actual threat. Several of the bill's co-sponsors described the 6th January Capitol protest as a white nationalist terror attack and characterized white supremacy as the country's top threat. While the Capitol protest was not a case of white terror, there have been several high-profile mass shootings carried out by known proponents of white nationalism. Experts claim that white racial extremism is responsible for 329 murders since 1994, which is roughly 13 killings per year. It's not their intention to downplay these lethal effects, however. More Americans are killed every 2 weeks in Chicago than in an entire average year of white racial extremist attacks. There seems to be an expectation that this will change in the future, however. Politicians know that continued demographic shifts against whites in the United States, accelerated by loose immigration policies and pathways to citizenship for at least 11 million illegals, up to 30 million. In addition to legislation and executive orders on gun control and social justice, will likely lead to growth in separatist sentiments, which will include white nationalist ideology. A large part of white nationalist propaganda tries to convince white conservatives that traditional American rights won't be protected in a multiracial, multicultural, non-Christian society, and that future generations of whites will be subject to predation when whites become the minority later this century. All you have to do is look at South Africa and Zimbabwe. I keep pointing to those for a reason. Those would be called indicators. White nationalists use the gruesome murders of white farmers in South Africa as an example of America's future. If we don't learn from history, why even bring it up? Chat rooms and forums also point to the popularity of anti-white rhetoric among the left as direct evidence of conspiracy against them. This anti-white rhetoric, which includes blaming white people and white supremacy for society's ills, is absolutely causing social resentment among whites and in the fringes of the internet, fueling interest in white nationalism, which has increasingly become sort of a defense mechanism for a racial population in relative decline. An editorial on top of the observation. As an aside, for weeks following the Capitol protests, the media inundated the American public with warnings of impending Trump-inspired violence. Federal agencies and mainstream outlets alike led many to believe that there were credible, imminent threats against the inauguration, which obviously never materialized, that justified a massive police state presence to ward off attacks. What did materialize, however, was leftist violence, primarily located in Portland and Seattle, the homes of ongoing proto-insurgencies. In fact, many conservatives and pro-Trump influencers warned others to stay away from political protest across the country. Anarchist and anti-fascist groups continue planning for disruptive demonstrations and violence. That violence happened on the night of the inauguration and will continue into this past weekend. Again, it's not their intention to make light of the risk of any violence, especially on the right, which is heavily armed. They haven't begun to see anything yet, if Americans actually wake up. But the ongoing threat remains primarily among anarchist and anti-fascist groups who battle with police on a nearly nightly basis. There has been a virtual media blackout of the ongoing disruptive protests, property damage, and violence. The New York Times amazingly wrote a single article on it. While these groups continue planning for more events this weekend, and for the rest of the month. Axios recently noted that trust in news journalism has fallen to an all-time low. Some 56% of Americans believe that journalists knowingly, only 56%? That's amazing. That's pathetic. Some 56% of Americans believe that journalists knowingly mislead their readers. You think? While 58% say that most news organizations are more concerned with supporting a political position than with informing the public. You're just now getting that. Just 18% of Republicans and 15% of Democrats trust the news media. Nowhere is this failure more apparent than the reporting that followed the Capitol Hill protest and usurpation. Unfortunately, all that irresponsible reporting, poorly formed opinion making, and politicized influence peddling is leading to some truly disastrous policy decisions and legislative efforts. Low intensity conflict insight. Anti-fascists plan further disruptions for the month. No shit. Anti-fascists and Black Lives Matter activists have planned further disruptions in Seattle, Washington this weekend and the next. Again, remember, this is from the 22nd, I believe, 4 days ago. In addition, Portland anti-fascists are vowing to carry out disruptions every day following the arrest of one of their organizers last night for blocking a railway. They specifically rejected calls from the Biden administrations for unity. Why would the administration call for that now? And encouraged proactive attacks on liberals who participate in exploitation and repression. Really? They're calling for attacks on their own? Stop it. The far left groups that, observers note, the far left groups that initiated most of the riots and carried out the disruptions under the Trump administrations are not going anywhere. They are inherently anti-government and are working to maintain the substantial amount of momentum gained in 2020. Far left post guides on bushcraft and wilderness survival. Leftists posted 2 guides on fieldcraft and bushcraft for revolutionary survival. The guides detailed how to build shelter making, start fires, source water, deter wild animals, trap or maybe hunt wild game, and land navigation. Their stated intent is to provide leftist revolutionaries with knowledge to endure dynamic survival situations, in quotations. Observers note. Insurgencies often counter the technological, numerical, and material superiority of the government by occupying austere rural environments. Jungles, forests, deserts, mountains, and swamps allow insurgents to hide, train, stockpile resources, and organize forces on the move. In addition, this will allow the parochial proto-insurgency to shift the center of gravity further away from large cities and avoid being isolated by government and counterinsurgent forces. Anarchists form Abolitionist Affiliation Network. Anarchist groups announced the beginning of a nationwide abolitionist affiliation group to collectively fight colonizers, fascists, and the state. The affiliation includes adopting security practices and vowing to never cooperate with the government or law enforcement. In addition, all affiliate groups must pledge to take up arms in mutual defense. Observers note, further decentralized affiliation between far-left groups will enable shared lessons learned, increase propaganda distribution, expand recruitment funnels, and shared resources. All these will fuel growth from the far-left proto-insurgency. Early-stage insurgencies often lack significant quantities of weapons and supplies. To gather the material necessary to endure a protracted conflict, they often engage in criminal enterprise and the theft of weapons or equipment from the government. They have not observed indications of this level of activity so far, but their intent is becoming more clear. Far right calls for infiltration of military ranks. Far-right chat room participants called for followers to quietly infiltrate the military to build a network of sympathizers, acquire security clearances, collect internal secrets, and achieve as much training as possible. In addition, they recommended infiltration as enlisted members due to the officer corps being more political and dominated by progressives at the higher levels. Observers note, accelerationists frequently call for the infiltration of government institutions, including law enforcement and the military. I'll reserve comment. Some far-right groups seek to cause internal disruptions to tie up resources and erode the legitimacy of the government. Others are seeking to acquire skills, resources, and manpower to initiate societal collapse and establish a subsequent white ethno-state. Good luck with that. So, I'm going to cut this one off. I think this is going to be longer than 7 minutes. No, I think I'll be able to, maybe. No, I'll do this one later. All right, so one more and I should be caught up. But I'm going to cut this one off at 13 minutes and 35, 30, 40, whatever seconds. So, all right, 6, 2, 3 out.